Standard man, somehow still at 26% despite new meta clan. Didn't sell deck, still very strong. Unga Bunga, Master, Pawn. Okay, sorry, I'll do better next time. So, welcome again. It's another meta analysis for Standard in Japan. Yay! So today we're taking a look at the V-BT05 one. So this one is post the new set, which has support for Royals, Golds, Narukami, Noob Otama, and OTT. So a lot of different clans, a lot of different decks, a lot of new builds for these clans. Once again, I was in Japan during this meta, so I got to experience it firsthand and see just how strong it really is, how strong the decks in the meta are. So it's pretty interesting. So, once again, as always, thank you to Dexander for this pie chart that we're going to take a look at today. Check him out on his blog, where you can see all the deck lists featured in this pie chart, as well as his Twitter, where he posts early updates to the pie chart and stuff like that. So let's just get into it. So, as I said, Bermuda, still 26%, has not budged a single inch. So Standard Man is still reigning very strong, even though there are a lot of counters for it right now, a lot of decks that beat it. But this chart has changed significantly. So let's take a look at some of the other changes. Bermuda, again, not worth talking about. Let's just talk about the counters as we go over the clans. So Kagura was very low on the last one, but managed to climb up pretty significantly here. So Kagura, as I said in the last video, has a lot of different build options, whether it's Blademaster Waterfall, the End, the Great, etc. So the deck I played against the most, especially in this meta, was actually the End. A lot of people are just going Force 2, using the Great 2 to make people guard with 2 cards at the same time. Going first, I think that's quite strong because, obviously, like, a Bermuda player can't even deal with that. Like, a lot of the decks don't even have enough hand to protect against it, although we do have OTT now in the mix, and Grand Blue is still very prominent as well, so it's kind of okay in that sense. But apart from that, like, Kagura is just looking very good right now because they've got a lot of tops. I mean, Blademaster Waterfall, I think that's when that deck was basically developed in this meta. I think a lot of people picked it up and started playing it because they realized that it's just really punishing against a lot of decks, and so if they don't have, like against Waterfall, if they don't have enough grade zeros, counting the Wyvern, then they kind of die. And same goes for the End as well. Like, that Griffin does a lot of work in a lot of different Kagura decks, and it's just the MVP. And so seeing it at 14%, I think that's kind of where Kagura should be in this meta. But it's interesting because it's been 2 sets already since it got support, so still going strong. Next up is Novas, still very, very strong, still sitting at the top over here. You know, I already talked about it, I made a video on it as I won my shop challenge on Novas. There's a lot of combos in this deck. It looks really good. I mean, honestly, I'm interested to see how some of these new decks actually deal with it, because like, we have another really strong Axel deck now in the meta, which is Narukami on top of Aqua Force from last set, that is able to kind of go head to toe, or like head to head, I guess, yeah, head to head, with Novas, and being able to bind some of their annoying targets is also pretty strong. Like, the Narukami matchup for Novas was already bad before the Gauntlet Buster supports, and now I feel like it's completely devastating because Gauntlet Buster just eats up your whole front row and you can't really do much about it, and you really have to think carefully about your pieces and all the stuff you commit from your hand, and like, I think that makes it pretty hard matchup. But I guess if it's not a very popular deck, which it is not, unfortunately, in Japan, yeah, then I mean, Novas keep free sailing, which is good for them too. Then Grand Blue, we already talked about this in the last video. Obviously, it's a very strong deck that can recycle PGs, has a lot of pressure on the Vanguard, big columns with the Skull Dragons, etc. Honestly, it's a very, very strong deck. I'm not too surprised that it's doing so good still, and I mean, even looking at the new stuff that came out, it's still really good. Just because, like, it still is able to counterblast choke stuff like Royals, even though they got their CC. It can counterblast choke stuff like, you know, whether it's Tsukuyomi, or whether it's, you know, Narukami, that also needs counterblast for a lot of their big plays. Like, it can really play around that quite easily. But, I mean, getting Skull Dragons bound is also not really happening because they retire at the end of the turn. Therefore, they can kind of play around the Narukami matchup pretty well as well, so that doesn't actually pose a big threat in that sense either, which is really cool. And it's also kind of concerning that we haven't seen a single V-BT05 clan so far as we've covered this pie chart, so yeah, something slightly concerning, but I don't think it's that big of an issue. But then, finally, we have Royals showing up at 6%, so 6% is shared by quite a few of the clans from this set. But so Royals are strong. They play Gantz a lot. They play usually one of the Alfreds and an Exculpate to boot. I played against it quite a bit, and one of the players actually top decked an Exculpate after, a Ganslot after Exculpating me and 6 damage healing against me one game, and then I lost, and that was pretty bad. But anyway, this deck is really strong because obviously Ganslot gives extra drives, a lot of extra pressure. Ganslot also is restricted to only working properly when your opponent is already grade 3, so when you go second basically. And on top of that, like, you can only have one Blaster Dart in the front row, Blaster Blade in the front row, otherwise, like, you're gonna lose out on the extra crit on him, which is also very important. But even though Ganslot doesn't do much on his own, like in terms of like he doesn't search anything, etc., he just powers up and does a gimmick, you still get a lot of searchers in the deck. Like, you got the new grade 1 that searches Blaster Blade. You have Gordon that counts as a booster and is actually a really, really good card, to my own surprise as well. And they got a Countercharger, and in general just a lot of really good cards. So the Ganslot deck is really, really strong, honestly, and it's very fair, I would say. It's nothing OP, nothing too crazy, but it's really fair, and it plays against most matchups very fairly, and so it's nice to see that as well. Next up is my DP. So as I said, this deck is still very strong. It still counters Bermuda. Narukami is also a very easy matchup for it too. I also didn't mention with Kagura, Blade Master is very good because it can nuke the whole board of Melody, which is very, very strong. But for DP, yeah, like I said, strong Bermuda matchup, strong Narukami matchup, just because even if they hit for 22 when you have 2 empty front rows, that's nothing that a 20k shield doesn't do to pass. So it's not that threatening in that sense. They always have to commit a booster behind to hit for really threatening numbers. Even like Cho'o's restand doesn't necessarily pressure you that much, so you're able to play that matchup pretty easily, and you don't need to give them that many bind targets, because if you use Daisaurus, he goes into the soul, they don't have anything to bind, and then it's kind of like, well, sure, you get extra power and crit, or you can get a restand, but it's not super scary in that sense. And so I feel like a lot of the cards in the Narukami deck don't do much against DP in that sense, and so DP has a good matchup against that, and the other matchups we already kind of talked about. So I didn't play much against OTT and Royals like I already mentioned, but yeah, DP is very strong in this meta. It's going to continue being very strong for quite a while. And then, as I've been talking about a lot, Narukami. So Narukami got Gauntlet Buster, they got Cho'o, they got Zuitan, they got so many strong cards. Absolutely insane how good this deck is right now. But obviously there are some matchups, as I said, like DP, that it doesn't do as much against, or Grand Blue that doesn't do that much against. And so it's not that great against some matchups, but then Royals, you can bind Blaster Blades. Against Fish, you bind their Finas, their Caros, you basically pull up everything from the back row as well just to get rid of it. So very, very strong in that sense. It destroys golds as well because it just binds the whole front row. Really good Nova matchups. I'm surprised it's only 6% here because I feel like the deck is much better than that. But I know it's not that popular in Japan, and it didn't feel like it was that popular either. It felt like the top players agreed that it was very strong, but your typical, shop tournament goer was like, oh, well, I'm just going to continue playing my deck. So yeah, it didn't feel that popular, but it is very, very strong, so I think that kind of explains why it's only 6% on this pie chart as well. But again, this deck is really, really good. Honestly, very, very strong. Next up, we have Gold. So Gold got Platina, Azel, Gold got Hole and Kaheda as well. I felt that Golds were very strong, especially against decks that need Counterblast, whether it's, DP, whether it's Grand Blue, etc. It's really good at choking right now, because you're able to still plus very consistently and keep your opponent at like 3 counterblasted damage and just like keep swinging with Raven-haired, keep pressuring them with a crit, like they have to take it or they die kind of thing, that kind of situation. But otherwise, the Platina is a really good finisher. Like, you don't want to go into it too early. Most players play it at like 2 or 3 copies because of that, so they go into it the very last minute when they want to set up that win con and set up the like a front trigger or something and then another superior call on top of that. So it's really, really good in my opinion. It's a very, very strong deck, and so it's still somewhat high rolly in standard, obviously. Like, if you go first and you have the Bowman, etc., the deck just kind of, snowballs like crazy, but it does have some bad matchups. Like I said, Narukami, devastating, absolutely just destroys it, and I think a lot of the other stuff like Kagura as well, just nuking the whole board, very, very strong. And so for Azel, that's not the easiest thing to play around, but it's still a very strong deck. Next up is Link Joker. We talked about that a lot in the last one, but it dropped to 5%, so not as dominating as it was last meta, but it's still a consistent pick, a good Force Clan to play with. Might not be the case after the next meta, but it's still very, very strong. So popularity might be dropping a bit as well, but honestly I still ran into it quite a lot in Japan, so if you want more of my thoughts on it, do watch the previous meta analysis as well. Then we have some new stuff popping in here again. We have Angel Feather returning as the go-to protect deck, but not so much because OTT and Grand Blue are technically a bit better. But Angels always will have a good win con, amazing stuff in terms of healing, you know, being able to re-ride, multiple protect markers in hand, a good Bermuda matchup, stuff like that. I think it's not so much of a good matchup against like Axel clans right now, like Narukami binding your palaces if you call them too early, or like, you know, Nova being able to rush early and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if it's that viable right now. This might have been just from a team tournament where it just was one of the slots, so not too sure on that one, but it's still there. Then Aqua Force, we talked about extensively last time, so do check out that video if you want more thoughts on that, but dropped all the way to 3%. It's not looking too good in terms of tops, even though representation is pretty high, but yeah, in terms of tops, not looking too good, but still up there. And then Noob Otama, this is our next clan from this set. Honestly, in Standard, it doesn't do as much. I feel like in Premium is really where this deck shines. In Standard, it just did not get enough of a boost, I think, to really shine in that sense. So yeah, kind of struggling, not looking too great. This new support has not been super amazing for the Standard deck, but it's still quite good, but it's just, they usually have 4 or less cards in hand anyway, so it's like you're not doing all that much. So I feel like Noob Otama needed a bit more of a different push in Standard, and so it's not looking super amazing right now, unfortunately. And finally, OTT, only 3%. This is interesting because I think this chart was mostly made before, well, I guess no, it was actually reported after a lot of decks changed from just Tsukuyomi, Imperial Daughter, and Deer to now being Tsukuyomi with the Aureole and the Deer. So the Aureole provides a bit of a different kind of, you know, it gives you extra draws and stuff like that and soul charges, and so those random soul charges kind of help potentially setting up Tsukuyomi a bit faster, which is kind of what the card was supposed to do from the start. And so Tsukuyomi feels a bit risky because if you don't get the right chain properly, the whole deck becomes really slow and everything just goes really slowly. You still have to discard 1 for her cost to be able to draw up to the amount of Tsukuyomis in soul, and so if you only have like 1 or something, it's not that good. So you really do need to be able to get that right chain consistently. It's a shame that Ichibiyoshi was not reprinted with his original skill and it's just a normal V-Series starter. Obviously, they don't want to break their consistency with the starters as they have been so far, but it's just a bit unfortunate, honestly. Like, it feels like the deck could have been better, but it's still very strong. I think this just does not include some of the lists that topped post V-BT06, where OTT is also still very consistent. So OTT players, don't worry too much. Just because 3% does not mean your deck is bad. I definitely can say that it's a very strong deck. So that's going to wrap it up for this meta analysis. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, big thank you to Dexander for the pie chart and everything. So check out the deck list on his website if you want to see more. But that's going to be it for me today. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.